Hi everybody. So today we are going to continue with section 6.1. Before we do that, we're actually going to review the assignment that you guys were supposed to do yesterday. So that was about midpoint, slope, and writing linear equations. And based on the scores from that assignment, it's very obvious that we need to review that stuff. So part of today's lesson involves using these topics here. So if you don't know how to do this, you're really going to struggle with what we do today. So we're going to review this really quickly. And just to let you know, as I go through these notes, if you're watching this during class, I'm going to try to go a little slower than normal, just because I know you have to keep up with taking notes on the packet. But keep in mind, if you are not able to keep up during class, this will be posted on Google Classroom, so you can always watch it at your own time and pause and do whatever you need to do to take the notes. Okay. So here we go. We're going to talk about how to find the midpoint. So we've learned this before. Remember that the midpoint is the middle of a segment. So like if you have a line segment, the midpoint is directly in the middle. So what we want to do, if these two endpoints are coordinates, like ordered pairs, right? We want to know what the middle of that is. And the way that we did that was we kind of just took the average, we added them up, and divided by 2. That's how you find the middle of something. So we're going to add the x's and divide by 2, add the y's and divide by 2. So let's do that over here. If I want to find the midpoint between these 2 points, we're just going to add the x's. So 5 plus negative 11, and we're going to divide by 2. And that's going to give us negative 6 divided by 2, which is negative 3. So that is the x value of our midpoint. And now we're going to do the same thing with the y values. So negative 1 plus 3 divided by 2, which is 2 divided by 2, which equals 1. So that's the y value. And then when you write out your answer, you want your midpoint to be written as an ordered pair. So we're going to write an ordered pair. We always put the x first. So that would be negative 3, 1. And that would be our answer. So that's how you find midpoint. You just add the x's, divide by 2, add the y's, divide by 2. All right, now we're going to talk about how to find slope. So this is another thing that we learned a while ago. You guys actually learned this in Algebra 1, and you most likely did it in middle school too. Even if you didn't take Algebra 1 in middle school, this is an 8th grade topic. So we're going to review it really quickly. When you find slope between 2 points, you're doing rise over run. Remember, that's always what slope is. It's rise over run, which is basically the change in y over the change in x. And by change, I mean the difference between them. So we're subtracting when we do slope. People get these confused a lot. With midpoint, you're adding. With slope, you're subtracting. And we want to do the y's first because we're doing rise over run, right? So we're going to do the y's on top of this. There's actually a mistake on these notes here. So you guys want to fix that. This is supposed to say y2 minus y1. So fix that on your notes. It should say y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And these little numbers here, they're just labels. It just means like this is the second y coordinate. This is the first y coordinate. That's all it means. So let's go ahead and do that. We actually have the same 2 points as the first problem here. So let's find the slope between these. Some people like to label them, like we can call this x1, y1, and then x2, y2. I don't normally do that, but some people like to do that. And then we're just going to use the slope formula. So we're going to do y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So let's go ahead and do that. That would be 3 minus negative 1. 3 minus negative 1 over negative 11 minus 5. And remember, anytime you have this double negative here, this is going to turn into a plus sign, right? That's like saying 3 plus 1 over 11 minus 5, which is, or sorry, negative 11 minus 5, which is negative 16. And 3 plus 1 is 4, so this is 4 over negative 16. Now, when you deal with slope, you want to leave it as a fraction usually, but you do want to reduce the fraction. 4 over 16 reduces to 1/4. So, and there's a negative there, right? So we're going to call this negative 1/4. It doesn't matter where you put your negative. You can put it on the top, on the bottom, or right in the middle. It doesn't matter. But that would be our slope, negative 1/4. So that is how you find slope. I'll leave that up for a second if you're still writing. All right, and then the last topic that we need to know, this was also on your assignment from yesterday. This was the topic that a lot of people got wrong. So I'm going to do this one a little slower than those other two topics. So we're going to write linear equations, and you do have to know how to do this for today. So the formula you need to remember is slope-intercept form, which is y equals mx plus b. And there's a whole bunch of steps here. I'm not going to read those to you. I'm just going to show you in an example over here. So what we want to do, we want a line that has a slope of 2 and passes through this point. Now, if you just kind of imagine that, and you don't have to draw this on your paper if you don't want to. I'm just kind of giving you a visual here. I know that it's going to go through the point 4, 1, which would be like, I don't know, somewhere over here, right? 4, positive 1. And I know it has to have a slope of 2. That means it's going to go up 2 over 1, right? Now, what we don't know, so it'll look something like that, right? What we don't know is the y-intercept. I had a lot of people yesterday trying to say that this number was the y-intercept, and that's just not true because it doesn't cross the y-axis, right? That's the definition of a y-intercept. It's supposed to cross the y-axis. In this case, the y-intercept is probably going to be somewhere down here, right? We just don't know what that is. And if we knew what that was, then we could write an equation like y equals 2x, and then we could fill in that y-intercept to finish our equation. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to find the y-intercept. So let's do that. This is how I taught it before. There's a couple different ways to do this, but the way that I taught it was using this slope-intercept formula. So we're going to start off with the formula, y equals mx plus b, and then we're going to plug in a bunch of stuff here. So if I'm going to use 2 as m, because remember m stands for slope. So instead of m, we're going to plug in 2. And then instead of x and y, we're going to plug in the x value of the point that they give us, which is 4. So that's going to go in for x. I'm putting it in parentheses because we're supposed to multiply those. And then for the y value, we're going to use 1 because that's the y value. So I'm going to bring down the 1 and then put my equal sign. And then I'll just bring down the plus b because that's the only piece we don't know. And now if you see what we have left here, you have a nice equation where you can actually solve this for b. So let's do that. 2 times 4 is 8. So now we have 8 plus b equals 1. And then you could subtract the 8 from both sides. And b is going to equal negative 7. And we're still not quite done. We do need to actually put it into an equation, right? Because that's the whole goal here. We want to write a linear equation. And we have everything we need now. We know that the slope is 2, and we know that the y-intercept is negative 7. So our final equation would look like y equals 2x minus 7. And that would be it. So that was a little quick review on all 3 of those topics. We're going to go ahead and move on now. All right, so today we are going to start writing equations of perpendicular bisectors. That's why we needed to know slope and all that stuff, because we're going to write equations today. Now, just remember, I'm going to go off over here. You don't have to write this down if you don't want to. A perpendicular bisector, we need to remember what that is. We talked about it last time. So if I have a segment, just any old segment, we'll call it AB. The perpendicular bisector is the line that goes through the middle. We'll call that the midpoint. But it can't go through the middle just any old way. Like this right here, that is not a perpendicular bisector. A perpendicular bisector has to go through the middle at a 90-degree angle. So it's got to make a right angle. It's got to be perfectly down the middle of the segment so that this piece is equal to this piece. So this right here would be a perpendicular bisector. And today we are going to practice writing equations of this line right here, which means we need to find a few things. We need to find where the middle of a segment is. We also need to make sure that there's going to be a right angle. So we're going to talk about both of those things. All right, so let's just jump into this example here. So we're going to write an equation of the perpendicular bisector of the segment with the following endpoints. So we've got these two endpoints here. Now what I would do first with those is just graph them so we can get a visual and we can see what this segment looks like. So let's graph P and Q. So that would be at -2, 3, that's P, and then Q is at 4, 1. And then we'll connect those dots to make it look like a segment. Okay, so now we want to know where the middle of this segment is, because if I want, what we're supposed to do is find a perpendicular bisector, right? And perpendicular bisectors, they have to go through the middle. So we need to find the middle. Now, sometimes when you have segments that are kind of short like this and they're nice and perfect, you can kind of eyeball it and figure out where the middle is, right? But we don't always want to rely on that. So we're going to find the middle using math. We're going to calculate the midpoint. This is why you needed to know how to find midpoint. So we're going to go ahead and do that. We are going to add the x's and divide by 2. So -2 plus 4 divided by 2. And we're going to add the y's and divide by 2. I'm just kind of writing it out for right now, and then we'll do the math. 3 plus 1 divided by 2. So we're finding the midpoint. Let's go ahead and simplify this a little bit. The x is going to turn into 2 divided by 2, which equals 1. And the y is going to turn into 4 divided by 2, which equals 2. So there we go. We have found the midpoint. I'm going to write it as an ordered pair. It would be 1, 2. All right, so that is your first step for doing this. We have figured out the middle. And if you graph that, 1, 2, you can see that that is the middle, right? That is exactly where we thought it should be. So what we want is the perpendicular line that goes through this. Just imagine what that would look like. Perpendicular means it has to make a right angle. So I'm just kind of drawing it by hand here. It's going to look something like that, right? And if you think about this, we have to make sure that this is a right angle. I want these lines to be perfectly perpendicular. And with math, the way that we do that is with slope, right? We've talked about this before. We've actually done this pretty recently, perpendicular slopes. So we want to make sure that this line has a perpendicular slope to this segment. So here's how we're going to do that. We're going to go ahead and find the slope of the segment first. Let's find the slope of PQ. Now there's two different ways to do this. You could just use the coordinates. So what were the coordinates of PQ? Let's look back up here. -2, 3, and 4, 1. -2, 3, and 4, 1. You could definitely just use those coordinates, and then you could just do, you know, your y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. I'm going to do it this way really quickly. So it would be 1 minus 3 over 4 minus -2, which turns into -2 on the top. On the bottom, we're going to end up with a +6 because of that double negative there. That's going to become addition, which is -1 over 3 once we reduce it. So that's the slope of PQ. Now, we want a slope that is perpendicular to that. And you got to remember how to do that. I want a perpendicular slope to that, right? So the perpendicular slope is going to be opposite reciprocal, which means you flip this and you change the sign, right? So this is going to become 3 over 1, positive 3 over 1, which is the same thing as just positive 3. And this one's really important. I'm going to put a star next to it. This is the one we need because we want our new line right here. We're trying to find the equation of this line. We want that line to have a slope of 3. We also want it to go through this middle point here. Okay, so we're just to recap, we found the midpoint, this point right here. We found the slope that we need to have, which is 3 over 1. You can kind of tell that that slope is going to be 3 over 1, right? Now we're going to find the equation of the line. And we're going to have to use that point that we found, the midpoint, which was 1, 2. And we're going to have to use that slope that we want. We want a slope of 3. And we're just going to do this just how we did on the front of this page here. We're going to use that slope-intercept form. And we're going to go ahead and start plugging stuff in. Remember that the slope goes in for m, And then for y and x, you just use these numbers right here. So that's your x and that's your y. It's going to be 2 equals 3 times 1 plus b. And then we can go ahead and solve this equation for b. So 3 times 1 is just 3. And we can subtract the 3. And we get -1. So -1 equals b. And we're all good to go. We can write the equation now. We know that our slope is supposed to be 3. So I'm going to put y equals 3x. And our y-intercept is -1, so -1. And that would be it. So I know it's a lot of work. It's just kind of a lot of different steps, right? But none of it is really difficult. It's all stuff that we've learned before. There's just a lot of steps to it. So those are the steps. That's how you want to do this every time. You want to find the middle, and then you want to figure out what your slope should be by making it perpendicular to the original one. And then you can go ahead and write the equation of the line. It's always a good idea to graph it too, just to visualize it and kind of make sure that it makes sense. Now, I didn't do a good job drawing my line here because the y-intercept should be at -1. You can tell my line's actually kind of crooked, right? Like it really should look, if I put the y-intercept at -1, that actually looks more perpendicular. So it does actually make sense, right? It would make sense for the y-intercept to be right there at -1. All right, let's do another example. Go ahead and turn the page. This page, we found slope using slope formula, where we just subtracted the numbers, right? Okay, I'm going to do this one a little bit faster. So we're going to do all the same steps. I'm going to go ahead and graph this first. That's always what I would do first. So -1, -5. Let's graph that. It's way down here. +3, -1. That would be right here. And then we'll connect them to make a segment. Okay, so first things first, we're going to find the midpoint. So we're just going to add the x's, divide by 2, add the y's, divide by 2. So that would look like this. -1 plus 3 divided by 2. And then for the y's, it's -5 plus -1 divided by 2. And then let's go ahead and simplify those really quick. So this one would become 2/2, which is 1. And then this would become -6/2, which is -3. So our midpoint is +1, -3. All right, that step is all done. Now we need to, and I'm gonna like circle that or something, right? Because I want to remember that. Now we need to find the slope. Now I didn't mention the other way to find slope, which I think is the easier way. But it doesn't matter. You can do it however you want. So however, if you have a graph, there's another way to find slope. This is how I usually find slope. You just do rise over run, right? Like if I want to find the slope of this line segment, let's just count it. Rise over run. It's going up 4, so that's +4, and then it's going to the right 4, that's another positive. So 4/4 is 1. That means my slope is 1. That's another way to do slope, and I think it's a little bit faster. You could absolutely do your slope formula, right? y2 minus y1, blah, blah, blah. That would work out just fine. Or you can just count the boxes. Just pick whichever method works best for you. Okay, so we found the slope. Kind of. We found what the original slope was, right? The slope of the segment, slope of DE, is +1. I need to know what the perpendicular slope should be. And we're just going to do the opposite of this, right? Opposite reciprocals. This is actually 1/1. So when you flip it, it's still going to be 1/1, but we're just going to make it negative. So the perpendicular slope is going to be -1. So we have our new slope, and now the only thing left is to write the equation, and we're going to be using these two pieces of information in order to do that. So let's write out our slope formula. Y equals mx plus b, and we're going to plug our stuff in, right? So our slope is -1, and then our x value is +1. I'm just getting those numbers from this point up here. Our y value is -3, so that's going to go over here for the y value. and the b we don't know. All right, and then let's solve this. Negative 1 times 1 is negative 1. And then we would have to add the 1 to the other side here. Sorry, I'm running out of room. I'm going to write it over here. This is going to be, let's see, negative 3 plus 1 is negative 2. So that's our y-intercept. And now we can write out our final equation. We know that the slope is negative 1, y-intercept is negative 2. That would look like this. Y equals negative, you can put negative 1x if you want to. I typically don't write the 1 because you don't have to. You can just write negative x minus 2. And there we go. I know I did that one a little bit faster. I'll leave this up for a second if you need to keep writing anything. And then we're going to try that last example at the bottom there. All right, we have one more example, and I picked this one in particular. You'll see why in a second. I wanted to make sure we did one where we end up with a fraction. So you'll see what I'm talking about in just a second. Let's follow all the same steps. Let's graph the points first. So 5, 2, that would be A, and then positive 1, negative 4, and we will connect those dots. All right, we're going to find the middle, right? That's always what we do first. So find the midpoint. And let's see, we're going to do our x's, 5 plus 1, 5 plus 1 divided by 2. Once you start doing this a lot, right, you don't have to show a lot of this work. I'm just showing a lot of work because this is your notes. You know, if you can find that midpoint in your head, that's fine. I know that's faster for a lot of people, so I'm just kind of writing the work out here so you have it. All right, midpoint's going to become, let's see, this is 6 over 2, which is 3. And this one, 2 plus negative 4, that's negative 2. So it's negative 2 over 2, which is negative 1. So the midpoint is positive 3, negative 1. All right, that's our midpoint. Now we should probably graph that. I don't think I did this on the other one. No, I forgot to do it on the other one. It's always a good idea to graph your midpoint because if you make a mistake in this step, you're going to ruin like the rest of the problem, you know? So if you want to make sure that this is correct, I would always graph that just to make sure it's correct. Let's graph 3, negative 1. Yep, that looks good to me, right? It's directly in the middle. So if you do your midpoint and it ends up like way over here, then you should definitely stop what you're doing and fix that, right? Because you don't want to mess up the rest of the problem. Okay, this works out. We're good to go. Let's finish the problem here. So the next thing we're supposed to do is figure out the slope. And we always want to start with the slope of the original one first, and then we can flip it to make it perpendicular. And again, I'm gonna do slope. I call it the short way. I guess it depends on what you prefer. I think this way is a little bit shorter. I'm just gonna count my rise over run. And you can use whatever points you want. Like you can use these far away points here. Now that we have our midpoint graphed, you can actually use that to figure out your slope. That's probably a little bit easier because they're closer together. So this is going up 3 and over to the right 2. So our slope is positive 3 over 2. So that's the original slope, positive 3 over 2. We want to make it perpendicular. So we're going to flip it upside down. It's going to become 2 over 3, and we're going to make it negative. So our slope this time is a fraction. We haven't done one like this yet. Our slopes have ended up being nice whole numbers. This time we have a fraction, but that's okay. All right, so we know this is our new slope. This is the important slope we want to work with, right? So let's go ahead and write out our equation. All right, so we're going to start with, I'm going to write down the information I need just so I have it handy here. The midpoint is 3, negative 1, and the slope that I want was negative 2/3. And remember, that's our x value, that's our y value, and obviously that is the slope because it's m. So let's go ahead and plug all this into slope-intercept form. All right, so the y value is going to go here. That's negative 1. slope is negative 2/3, and x value is positive 3, and then we'll just bring down the plus b. Okay, and I know that some people freak out when we have fractions, right? But you guys can do this. Don't freak out. This is easy. We've done this before. Negative 2/3 of 3. I'll let you think about that for a second. You should be able to just do that, like in your head. And if you can't, it's okay. I'll show you how to do it the long way. But you want to take negative 2/3 of 3. So think about that. Over here, I'll show you how to do this kind of the long way. Negative 2/3 times 3. You can put a 1 under the 3, and then you just go straight across. Negative 2 times 3 is negative 6. 3 times 1 is 3. And then if you divide that, negative 6 divided by 3, that's negative 2. So all of this just equals negative 2. Look at that, no more fraction. All right, we're going to bring down everything, and then we're going to move the 2 over, and we get positive 1 for the y-intercept. So we're all done. We can write it out. We know that our slope is negative 2/3, so negative 2/3 x plus 1. All right, so at this time, we are actually done with the content for 6.1. However, there is a topic that we have to talk about that has nothing to do with this on the last page. You'll see. It's probably something you've learned before. So you can take, we're going to go to the last page in a second, but I just wanted to let you know most of the work today is going to be about this stuff. The last page, the reason why I wanted to do it today is because you're going to need to know it for the lessons that are coming up soon. So I wanted to review that first. So let's go ahead and turn over to the last page. All right, here we go. This probably looks really familiar, right? You guys have seen this before. I'm sure you have. Pythagorean theorem. It's something you typically learn in middle school. We're going to talk about it today. It'll probably come back to you really quickly. A lot of people remember Pythagorean theorem. So again, this little statement here just kind of says what I just said. This part of the notes has nothing to do at all with what we just learned. It seems kind of random to just throw it in here, but you do need to know it for next time, so I figured we could go ahead and review it. And it's a pretty easy topic, so it's not too bad. All right, so Pythagorean theorem. It's a theorem that only works with right triangles. So this is a right triangle, right? We know all about right triangles. We've been learning about triangles for a while now. And we actually have talked about these words pretty recently. In a right triangle, there's two different types of sides. So these sides, the ones that are attached to that 90-degree angle, those are called the legs. So these are called the legs of the right triangle. And then the long side, the side that's always across from the 90-degree angle, that is called the hypotenuse. We learned about this when we were learning about like HL, remember that? Yeah, this is the hypotenuse. It's always going to be this long side. It's across from the right angle here. And typically with right angles, they usually use these letters to label the sides. A, B. A and B are going to be the legs, and it doesn't matter where they are. Like you could have done it the other way around. You could have done BA. It doesn't really matter. C though, C is very important. C is only used to label the hypotenuse. So that's super important. C is always going to be our hypotenuse label. So what is the Pythagorean theorem? So Pythagorean theorem, we use it to help us find missing sides of a right triangle. So missing side length of a right triangle. And I bet a few of you probably remember what it is, but we're going to write it right here. So it is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Now, typically, whenever I teach this for the first time, I go into like this big old thing that shows you why this works. We're not going to get into that right now. If I was actually in class today, I probably would do it, but just for the sake of time, we're just going to jump right in. So this formula, this does work every single time as long as you have a right triangle. And maybe someday I will show you why this works. But for now, we're just going to do some practice. So here's how we use this. Now this is the most basic form of Pythagorean theorem. We're not going to do super crazy examples or anything. What you want to do, if I want to figure out this missing side right here, we are going to use Pythagorean theorem to do that. So a squared plus b squared equals c squared. You just want to label the triangle first. So a and b are always going to be your legs, right? Always label your legs A and B. C is the important one. C is going to be the hypotenuse. And in this case, that right there is the hypotenuse because it's the one that's across from the 90-degree angle. It's the longest side. So that's our C. A and B don't really matter. You can put them wherever you want. I'm going to put A here and B here. And then we can plug in these numbers for A, B, and C. So for, we're just going to use Pythagorean theorem. Instead of a squared plus b squared, I'm going to put a squared plus 7 squared. Now we don't know c because that's what we want to find. So I'm just going to put x there. So now we have this equation and we're just going to start simplifying. 8 squared, that's like 8 times 8, right? Do not say that this is 16. Don't do that. I always have people do that. 8 times 8 is 64. And then 7 squared is 49. And then we're just going to go ahead and add these together. So that would be 113 equals x squared. And then to solve this, you have to get rid of this squared, right? Because we're trying to get x by itself. And the way that you do that, you want to do the opposite of squaring something, which is taking the square root. So that's always the last step with Pythagorean theorem, is to take the square root of both sides. So this would become just regular x. Now this doesn't have a nice square root, and for today, we're just gonna use decimals. There is another way to deal with stuff like this, but for today, we're just gonna use decimals. So you can just take the square root like in your calculator. If you don't know how to take the square root of something, you need to ask somebody. Just have somebody show you that. You know, I'm sure that a lot of people could help you out with that. You're looking for a button that does square roots, either in your calculator or phone or whatever you're using. The square root of 113 is approximately 10.6. So that would be our answer. We're done. 10.6. Okay, that next one is kind of the same thing. I'm actually not gonna do, I'm gonna skip around because you guys could do those. Same thing here, like this would be A, this would be B, this would be C, and then you could just do it the same way. I wanna do one that's set up a little bit differently here. So number 3, if we look at that one, this time, I always like to label the C first. Let's do that, let's start doing that. So across from the 90 is right here. This would be our hypotenuse because that's the side across from the 90, which means our A and B are gonna be these guys here. So let's set this up. If we set it up the way Pythagorean theorem tells us to, that means we're gonna have this. A is 6, so 6 squared plus, now we don't actually have B this time. I'm gonna call that my x squared. And then we do have C, so that means our 13 squared goes at the end. This is set up a little differently, right? We don't have this number over here. This time we have C. So we're still gonna do it the same way. 6 squared is 36. 13 squared is 169. And now, because of where my equal sign is, I'm not gonna add these because you're not supposed to add those, right? They're on different sides of the equal sign. We're actually gonna subtract. So we're gonna subtract 36 from both sides. And that gives us 133. And then we can just take the square root of both sides to figure out what our missing side is. And once again, we have another decimal. That's okay. So that's about 11.5. All right. So that is how you do Pythagorean theorem. I'm going to let you guys just try the rest of these on your own. And maybe somebody can come up and pause the video right now because I'm going to put the answers up in a second. But I'm going to let you guys try the rest of these on your own. So somebody come up and pause this video. And then once it seems like most of you are about done, you can unpause it and then the answers will show. All right, guys, there are the answers to the rest of those problems. So good luck on your assignment. If you have any questions, ask someone next to you or just let me know and I can help you through email or something. And I will see you guys next time.